Hi friends, this is Ankit Suman and you're watching EduConnect. I'm going to teach you history for 11th and 12th standards. This time we are here for the 11th class history. We are already aware with the news that due to the pandemic of COVID-19, the government has removed some of the chapters from its various syllabi. So we left the first chapter of this book and we are here on the second chapter. This chapter contains introduction, Mesopotamia and its geography, the significance of urbanism, movement of goods into cities, the development of writing, the system of writing, literacy, the uses of writing, urbanization in southern Mesopotamia, temples and kings, life in the city, a trading town in a pastoral zone, cities in Mesopotamian culture, and the legacy of writing. But if we are going to read this chapter in the same manner, believe me, it would be difficult for us to understand the whole concept. So we'll read in a different manner. We'll discuss introduction, the significance of urbanism, Mesopotamia, the land and geography, trade and movement, writing and trade, start of urbanization, in which we'll discuss temples, village problems, kings, rulers and village connections. Then we'll move to life in the city. The city is Ur, its marriage system, city of Ur, and the superstitions. Then we'll move to the pastoralist and trade, and in the end we'll discuss the legacy of writing. So my dear friends, I would like to ask you that when would you start calling a village as a town or city? When there will be large crowd? Maybe yes, or better infrastructure. And what else? A blooming economy. Maybe yes. Well, your guesses take us to a conclusion that what a city actually is. Cities and towns are not just places with large populations. These are the places where an economy comprises, besides food production, trade, manufacturing, and services. For example, you have clubs, restaurant, bar, station halls, garages, airports, library, etc. Like when there is an economy comprised besides food production, trade, manufacturing and services, and the clubs, the restaurant, the bars, the stations, the cinema halls, these are not included in the trade or manufacturing or very normal services. They are rarely present in the small town or the villages. So when these are the things which we gather, we call it a city. Thus we can say that city people are thus dependent on the product or services of other people or places, and division of labor is a mark of city life. Further, a city requires fuel, wood, food, clothes, stones, metal, etc. And it is very natural that most of the things that we want are not available at the same place, and this is the time when trade comes into the picture. Let us understand this trade. To control and organize this trade and much more things, a city requires a social organization as well. Organization brings one more thing in our picture, and that is writing. Organization and trade requires documentation for record keeping, right? And this is where writing comes into the picture. This chapter talks about two different things which are also connected to each other. Number one, writing. Number two, city life. We'll first discuss writing and then move to the city life. The Mesopotamia. City life began in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was the ancient civilization which existed from circa 3100 BCE to 579 BCE, where BCE stands for before Common Era. Mesopotamia existed in the present day land of Iraq and Syria. Like in this map, you could easily see that this area is Mesopotamia and it lies in the present day Iraq here, and to some extent Syria, and to some extent Iran. The name Mesopotamia is derived from Greek word mesos, meaning middle, and potamos, meaning river. So the land was basically between two rivers named Euphrates and Tigris. If you would try to see, you could see that there is this one river Euphrates going on, and there is the another river Tigris. So the land between both these rivers is the Mesopotamia. Okay, in the northeast lie Crane Plains. This is the northeast region. Here are the green plains, gradually rising to tree-covered mountain ranges with enough rainfall to grow crops. Here, agriculture began at 7000 to 6000 BCE. Moving on, we could see that this place, Iraq, and this place, Mesopotamia, is same. So the present day Iraq has the older Mesopotamia. Okay, next so the north part of this Mesopotamia is here, and there is a stretch land called steppe where animal herding offers people a better livelihood than agriculture, whereas to the east you could see this part here. To the east, the Tigris river provides route for the communication into the mountains of Iran. The southern part, the southern part is a desert. Here is a desert, and this is where the first cities and writings emerged. After the Euphrates has entered the desert, its water flows out into small channels. These channels flood their banks and in the past functioned as irrigation canals. Now let us know something about the zoology of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian sheep and goats produced meat, milk, and wool in abundance. Fish was available in rivers. Apart from all these things, the Mesopotamians enjoyed date palms in summer. Trade and movement. Do you remember that we discussed a few minutes ago only that all the things that we wish we do not get at the same place? The same happened with the Mesopotamians. Mesopotamia's mineral sources were very few. The Mesopotamians lacked in number one, stones for tools, seals, and jewels. Number two, wood, and number three, metals. So we can definitely assume that the Mesopotamians could have traded their textile, wood, metal, stone, etc. from Turkey, Iran, and across the Gulf. These latter regions had mineral resources but less scope for agriculture. So there are high chances of exchanges. Besides crafts, trade, and services, efficient transport is also important for urban development. The cheapest mode of transportation everywhere is over water, and Mesopotamia was fortunate in that sense as well. The river channels worked as natural canals for the Mesopotamia to travel on. Writing and trade. Finally, we reached to the writing section of this chapter. Well, we were already discussing writing. We'll now understand how did writing actually came into the picture and how did writing start. All societies have some languages in which certain spoken sound conveyed certain meaning. When those sounds are tried to be conveyed by some specific script, that is called a written conversation. So the Mesopotamians expressed their views through a specific pictorial script. We came to know about the script when there were tablets found in Mesopotamia, where there were more than 5,000 lists of goods that temples of Uruk in the city of South. So here we can conclude that due to the requirement of record keeping, writing came into existence. Now let us know the system of writing in Mesopotamia. System of writing in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamians wrote on tablets of clay. You could see these tablets in this picture. These are the tablets here. These are the clay tablets on which the Mesopotamians used to write. A scribe would wet a clay and pat it into a size he could comfortably hold it in one hand. He would carefully smoothen its surfaces with the sharp end of a reed cut obliquely. He would press wedge-shaped signs on the smoothened surface while it was still moist. Once dried in the sun, the clay would harden and the tablets would be almost indestructible. Once the surface dried, signs could not be presented on a tablet, so each transaction, however minor, required a separate written tablet, and that is why there are hundreds of clay tablets found at Mesopotamian sites. Urbanization in southern Mesopotamia, temples and kings. From 5000 BCE, settlements had begun to develop in southern Mesopotamia. The earliest cities emerged from some of these settlements. These were of various kinds. Number one, those that gradually developed around temples. Number two, those that developed as centers of trade. Number three, those that developed as imperial cities. This chapter has discussed the first of two types. Temples. The early settlers who are yet to be known began to build temples. Temples were considered as the residence of various gods. The god, the love god, Inanna, the moon god, etc. So temples were considered as the residence of various gods. Constructed in brick, temples became larger over time with several rooms around open courtyards. There were some cultural activities in temples. The god was the focus of worship. To him or her, people brought grain, curd, and fish. It has been noticed that the floors of some early temples had thick layers of fish bones. The god was also the theoretical owner of the agricultural fisheries and the herds of the local community. In time, the processing of the produce, for example, the pressing, grain grinding, spinning, and the weaving of woolen cloth was also done in the temple. So we see that there was some cultural activities done in the temples as well. Agriculture, a subject of hazard. This section also discusses about the agriculture. In spite of the natural fertility, agriculture was a subject to hazard for these people. The natural outlet of channels of the Euphrates would have too much water one year and flooded the crops. Sometimes they changed the course altogether. Apart from this, there were some man-made problems as well. Those who lived in the upstream stretches of a channel could divert so much water into their fields that villages downstream were left without water. Kings. When there was continuous warfare in the region due to these man-made problems, due to these water problems, the chiefs who won those battles in those continuous warfare would oblige their followers by distributing the loot and would take prisoners from the defeated group to employ as their guards or servants. In time, the victorious chiefs began to offer precious booty to the gods and thus beautify the community's temple. They would send their men to fetch fine stones and metals for the benefit of the god and community and organize the distribution of temple wealth in an efficient way by accounting for things that came in and went out. Like they would send men to fetch fine stones and metals for the benefit of the god and community and the temples and organize the distribution of temples wealth in an efficient way by accounting for things that came in the temple and that went out. The next thing that this section discussed is about the rulers and the villagers, how the rulers and villagers were connected to each other. There is an example given of a city named Uruk. Uruk started expanding from about 4200 BCE and about 2800 BCE. It had expanded to 400 hectares. Thus, war captives and local people of that place they were put to work for the temple, which was the center of the whole city, or directly for the rulers. This was compulsory rather than the agricultural tax. Hundreds of ration lists have been found which give against people's names the quantities of grain, cloth, or oil allotted to them. So we see a mutual relationship between rulers and villagers. The rulers gave them work, the villagers worked for the rulers, and the rulers for that paid them in ration and so many things. Life in the city. In this section, we will see how a city named Ur was developed, what was the life in that city. Ur was a southern city of the Mesopotamia, and let's just see what was the marriage system in Mesopotamian family. It has been noticed that in the Mesopotamian families, the nuclear family was the norm, although the married son resided with his parents. The father was the head of the family. A declaration was made about the willingness to marry, the bride's parents giving their consent to the marriage. Then a gift was given by the groom's people to the bride's people. When the wedding took place, gifts were exchanged by both parties who ate together and made offerings in a temple. So it was a kind gesture for that place. When her mother-in-law came to fetch her, the bride was given a share of the inheritance by her father. Hello everyone. We have already covered the first part of this chapter, and we are going to cover the rest of the part of this chapter in this second video. Life in the city of Ur. We have discussed various things in the last video. Now we will discuss what was the city of Ur and how was it. Ur is one of the earliest cities to have been excavated. Its ordinary houses were systematically excavated in 1930s. The streets of Ur are narrow winding, where carts would have reached with difficulty. Sacks of grain and firewood have arrived on donkey back. Narrow winding streets and the irregular shape of house plots also indicate an absence of town planning. There were no street drains found in the kind we find in contemporary Mohenjo-daro. Drains and clay pipes were instead found in the inner courtyards of the Ur houses, and it is thought that house roofs were made inwards and the rainwater was channeled via the drain pipes into sumps in the inner courtyard. People seem to have swept all their household refuse into the streets to be trodden underfoot. This made streets level rise, and over time the thresholds of houses had also to be raised so that no mud would flow inside after the rains. Light came into the rooms not from the windows but from doorways opening into the courtyards. Superstitions in Ur. There were superstitions about houses recorded in omen tablets at Ur, like a raised threshold brought wealth. The second superstition was if the main door of a house opened outwards, the wife would torment to her husband. The third superstition was there was a town cemetery at Ur in which the graves of royalty and commoners have been found, but we can see that a few individuals were found buried under the floors of ordinary houses. Coming on to the second last section of this book is the pastoralist and trade. We are not very much habitual with the word pastoralist. Pastoralists are those who have flock of animals, sheep, and they take them for the grazing, for the grass grazing at hilly areas and so much of grasslands. So they are known as pastoralists. Now, Mari lied on the bank of river Euphrates. Mari is a city which lied on the banks of the river Euphrates, or the northeastern side of Mesopotamia. Mari was the royal capital and it flourished after 2000 BCE. This section tells us about the Mari place and the people of that place, the kings of that place. Okay. So some communities in the kingdom of Mari had both farmers and pastoralists, but most of its territory was used for pasturing sheep and goats. Herders used to exchange young animals, cheese, leather, and meat in return for grain, metal tool, etc. The manure of a penned flock is also a great use to a farmer, so there are more chances that herders used to exchange animals, cheese, leather, and meat in return for grain, metal tools, etc. to the farmer. Conflicts. There were some conflicts between pastoralists and farmers. Some shepherd may take his flock to water across a sown field to ruin the crop of a farmer. Herdsmen, being mobile, can raid agricultural villages and seize their stored goods. Pastoralists believe that settled groups may deny pastoralists access to river and canal water along a certain set of paths. Settling down of pastoralists. The pastoralists then wanted to settle down at so many places. Through Mesopotamian history, nomadic communities of the western desert filtered into the prosperous agricultural heartland. Shepherds would bring their flock into sown area in the summer. Such groups would come in as herders, harvest laborers, or hired soldiers, occasionally became prosperous and settled down. A few also gained the power to establish their own rule. Akkadians, Amorites, Assyrians, and Armenians are some examples of the rulers who were earlier pastoralists, and later on, when they settled down, they gained the power to establish their own rule. Mari's culture was also diverse and was open to all. We see the kings of Mari were Amorites, whose dressing sense were different from the original inhabitants, and who respected not only the gods of Mesopotamia, but also built temples at Mari for the god of the steppe, the Dagon god. So the last section of this chapter, the legacy of writing. Mesopotamians would always be credited for giving the world a saga of writing. Not just writing, but basic mathematical applications, arithmetical applications, the calendar, and understanding time that we see today, that 365 days makes a year, 12 months makes a year, 1 month is made up of 7 weeks, and then 1 day is made up of 24 hours, and then 1 hour is made up of 60 minutes, and then 60 minutes. So all these things that has come to us has actually come from the Mesopotamians only. It later on moved to the Arabs and then to the Europeans, and then in the end came to us. The credit goes to the Mesopotamians. The record keeping and observation of solar and lunar eclipses was possible only due to the process of writing. So thank you for listening to this lecture so patiently. Thank you so much.